right, I'm going to call the meeting of the Housing Policy Board to order.
When my blood is warmed up, this first thing in the morning. Just for me.
And
That's good for you, though. That's good, I think.
there's our minutes recorder. Okay. So our first order of business is always introductions. My name is Norton Cabell. I'm your chair. As long as it is your pleasure, I took the liberty of inviting my grandson, Mike Benedict, to sit at the table. He probably won't say anything. He's not totally strange to the affairs of government and politics. You know your congressman?
John Goose.
Okay.
He said something. Congratulations.
And he has testified at the Colorado State Legislature on the issue of gun safety, they call it now. So he's not a total neophyte. So that's him. And you are Stephanie?
Stephanie Jennings, City of Eugene staff.
Chris Pryor, Eugene City Council.
Kristen Farley, St. Vincent de Paul.
Emily Ryan, Medco, and Lorna Neighborhood Housing. Teresa Kennedy, City of Eugene staff.
Jenna Fribley, Housing Policy Board. Also, Isaac said he's on his way and running 2 minutes late.
Great.
And Steve Oaks with Homes for Good Housing Agency.
Daniel Ivey, Housing Policy Board.
Joe Burney, County Commissioner, Springfield.
Chris Wigg, member of the Housing Policy Board.
So you all out there like to introduce yourselves?
Hi there, I'm Michelle Stark. I'm with St. Vincent de Paul.
Okay.
Christopher Grasbeck,
Nigel Mosby, here for a Renters Protection Committee position.
Ethan Nelson, City of Eugene.
Devin Jenkins, Laurel Hill Center.
Erin Grimshaw, Medco, Willamette Housing.
Josh Rocco, Springfield Eugene Tenant Association.
Gwen Burkhardt, NERP, and Jefferson Westside Neighborhood Association.
Hi, Wayne Martin. Nightingale posted shelters and assorted other things.
Great.
Diana Belowski, Housing Task Force of the Human Rights Commission.
Todd Boyle, retired guy, an advocate for low-income housing.
Okay, first order of business is public comment. And so we're pretty casual here, but I have two people who signed in. Todd, you want to say something?
Yes. I just wanted to put in another pitch for attention to the housing needs for the bottom 10 or 20%. There's 36,000 people who live on less than $1,000 a month. They can afford about maybe 200 or 300 a month. And their numbers are actually growing, and they will really grow in the next recession. And the amount of housing available for them continues to go down. And nobody's making any new housing that can be rented for 200 or 300 a month without massive subsidies. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I sure admire the problem. Because what we need to do is materialize somehow that tens of thousands of people can have housing that costs around $50,000 per unit. And that should be like the bright light goal of housing policy. We have to create a lot of new housing that costs $50,000 or $30,000 per unit. And people are doing this with tiny houses and stuff. There are a lot of solutions to where this is possible. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. And Wayne Martin, who can talk about that? Hello, Wayne.
I don't know how I got on that list. Telepathically?
So, the interested parties list. At one of your meetings, they asked me to put all of you on. So.
Oh. Well, I'll come up with something I think is important, and that is, I would really advocate that anything having to do with housing, as you all do so well, include a male and female unhoused person, just as additional resources. People who have done this. The Poverty and Homeless Board of the county did that a few years ago. And I think it's been, with Chris showing the way, it's been really, really useful in recent times. And would you be open to it? Would you consider having at least one and possibly one of each gender sit in on these meetings and help guide you maybe save you some mistakes.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like.
While we've got you.
Sure.
I'm not sure everybody here knows what Nightingale is.
Oh, what Nightingale is. Nightingale's a rest stop. It was featured in yesterday's paper on the front page. We have room for 20 residents right now. We don't quite have 20 residents. It's at 35th and Hilliard in the parking lot that belongs to Good Samaritan. Please come visit. Our board meeting's today at 1.
Thanks.
Yeah. If you want to leave this early, it's just fine. You can follow.
So Majeska, did you want to say something?
Oh, Majeska C-Screen. Is Ann here? I want to say something for Churchwomen United and also for ACT, a community.
For say again?
Churchwomen United.
Okay.
And for ACT, a community together. First of all, especially for Churchwomen United, on the CET issue, we feel it's extremely important to use it as well as possible for additional housing for very low income people in the first and second deciles. I'm not sure what's in the works about that, but just wanted to put in a word for that. And secondly, for both Churchwomen United and ACT, I know this is the time of year that work plans and strategic plans are formalized a little more for the next period. And I know it's been a couple of years since the Poverty and Homelessness Board began, and things got a little unclear. What's the role of this group in comparison to that group? And all that stuff I guess has been worked out, but it's still kind of unclear to a lot of us in the public. And I just wanted to say that it's a time for the public to do more monitoring of this kind of stuff, to figure out what's going on in the different areas and to see where there's more silos than there should be and some things that could be done to overcome those silos. And so I'll be trying to monitor it. And if it's difficult for me to figure out, we can imagine it's much more difficult for the average person out there to figure out. So that's something I'll be working with staff and others among you about in the coming period.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think maybe you'll find today's agenda interesting to you. And does anybody else?
Is this for the public?
Yeah, you
Okay.
can send over.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else want to say anything to us? Okay. Next on the agenda is minutes approval. I have 2 corrections. The May meeting on page 6 at the bottom. Ms. Jennings mentioned the Human Services and Housing Committee. What is that?
I believe it was the Poverty and Homelessness Board. Because if you're talking about
The very bottom, the very bottom.
Yep, if you're talking about the homeless services system and permanent supportive housing,
That would be
yes.
PHB.
Or is that referring to a legislative committee?
Let me just look at the context.
Oh, would be meeting that day.
Yeah, it could have been the state Human Services and Housing Committee.
That looks reasonable.
Yeah, because I think that in the next sentence I say, she thought hearing the legislature discuss the homeless system as a whole was a change. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
That
so
makes
it's,
sense.
so it's okay as is.
Yeah,
Or just add the word state.
yes.
And then on the top of the next page, page 7, the 3rd paragraph, Mr. Van Landingham said there were 2 huge bills, including an anti-vaccination bill, most, a legislator, and a cap and trade bill. That's a sentence which doesn't make any sense. And I suspect something got left out. Does anybody recall? John's not here.
All right, we can follow up with John. just
Okay.
to clarify what it was that he said.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything regarding the minutes? There are 2 months' worth of minutes here, May and June. I will deem them approved, seeing no objection. Okay, next on the agenda, items from Housing Policy Board members and staff. I went, so Better Housing Together, do I have the name right? I went to a workshop they had on ADUs, which was eye-opening to me. And so I'm hoping that we will later in the agenda. Okay, get an update on that. Okay, that's it for me. Isaac, anything?
Nothing new for me.
Chris?
No, most of what I would talk about is going to be picked up in other stuff.
Okay.
I'm happy to report that St. Vincent Paul received the state tax credit financing for the River Road project. So, we got our funding. We are continuing with design development and working with the neighborhood, and we will hope to break ground late spring, early summer 2020. Also, I just wanted to note I have been participating in Oregon Housing's qualified allocation process. They're making a lot of pretty drastic changes in how they will allocate tax credits, and they're also considering changing the regions for allocations, which will impact us. So I would encourage everyone to keep their eyes on that process also. And then she's already introduced herself, but I just wanted to say that Michelle Stark is our new program coordinator. So she has been interning and working part-time, but she is now officially full-time in the Housing Development Department at
So what does
CDC.
program developer mean?
She's working with me. She's my...
Okay. Okay. Emily?
Kristen, would you mind just saying the number of units?
Oh, yeah.
That
River Road is...
Oh, yeah.
And runs.
53 units, 1s, 2s, and 3s. We have 5 units for households at 30% of AMI, 4 1-bedrooms, 1 2-bedrooms. Those rents are $293 and $350. The 50% units are $475, $555, and $625. And we have 5 units that are set aside for clients of women's space.
And just for everybody in the room, the city participated in this project by providing the land, home funds, system development charge waivers, and a 20-year tax exemption.
Good. Emily?
She-
So you said you represent who?
Oh.
Nice try.
Still trying to get the name out of it.
It's only a month away, right?
Join us September 18th at our breakfast, and you will learn the new name.
I've already RSVP'd.
Excellent. If anybody can't make the breakfast here, we're doing a similar event in Corvallis the evening of September 12th, so you have a backup event. Just let me know, and I can forward that invitation too. She already introduced herself, but I just want to call out Erin Day in the audience, who is our new Director of Real Estate Development. So I'm no longer pretending to be a real estate developer. She is quickly getting up to speed on all of those projects, and you'll probably see her from time to time here at this committee.
Great. Jenna?
No, I don't have any updates.
Steve?
Nothing new here.
Okay.
Nothing for me.
Mark,
Go.
just for comments?
Yeah, you broke ground.
Oh, was that after the last one? It's been for- I thought maybe we'd already covered that. It feels like forever ago now. No, so we broke ground at Market District Commons, and I know many of you were able to make the groundbreaking. But yeah, it's exciting. Finally, I would say, and it's going to be 50 units above commercial, and 15 of those are set aside for very low income, and we're partnering with St. Vincent Paul VETLIF program and Full Access to provide a preference for those 15 units. And yeah, we're super excited. It's going to be finishing up about the time all the OB Market District expansion's done next in October of next year. So.
Okay.
Nope.
Heaven help us develop housing for the 36,000 people that make under $1,000 a month when it takes this long to name a new organization. Or the pace. I am overwhelmed. I have nothing to report. Hands in all sorts of allocations for housing. Board is starting to look at what flesh, what the bones and potential flesh of a housing bond might look like and be structured and be presented. And I'm overwhelmed with the dimensions of the problem, given our combined lack of capacity to respond at that level.
All I have is that the renter helpline operated by the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association is online and taking calls and helping people. And if it is okay with the group, I will send information about that to Teresa to distribute to all of you.
Right.
Rather than me try to remember right now all of the aspects. I'm no longer on the board of the tenant association. And so I'm getting my information secondhand, just like all of you. But I'll get that to you guys by the end of the week.
Great, great. Okay, and staff.
Yes, so several updates. So like Kristen, we are following the state's qualified allocation process changes, which some of you know that jurisdictions that receive home funds kind of have their own region, and they are considering some changes to that. We had a phone call with OHCS staff, really kind of talking to them about the importance of maintaining separate regions for using home funds, because it is challenging to dedicate those federal resources and have enough certainty to line those up. That went well, and I saw some of our comments reflected in the presentation that was given to the Housing Stability Council on Friday. But we will continue to monitor that process, which is just really for the 9% tax credits and some other resources that go along with that. The other sort of piece, like others, we're trying to track the multiple different RFPs that are coming out at the state level, and you know, and my understanding is that they're actually going to be creating a 2-year timeline for those RFP processes, which will be extremely helpful because it will give agencies in the city the ability to figure out how to line up more projects, because really the vast majority of the resources are available through the state, and we're trying to figure out how to leverage as much as possible. So that was one. The second item is I wanted to just let folks know that we are in the process of seeking applications for a consultant for the consolidated planning process and the analysis of impediments process. I would like to maybe spend a little bit of time on the September agenda talking about that process with folks, but that is something that we will be working on and providing updates to HPB throughout the year. This is the Eugene Springfield Consolidated Plan, so it's a process that we do together with Springfield. Eugene and Springfield will be conducting separate analyses of impediments.
And the timeline, is this has to be done by next May or something like that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It has to be completed by next May, and you have to complete your consolidated plan, which is your 5-year goals, and your action plan at the same time.
Right.
So yes, and it's generally a fairly significant undertaking to do this work. So other things I did want to mention, we started doing a housing newsletter. We're going to have another edition that is going to be coming out in the next week or so. If you'd like to receive that newsletter, you can sign up on the website, and then we'll also attach it to the next packet for the Housing Policy Board, so everyone will see that. And then I did want to mention that Oregon Housing and Community Services recently shared a housing cost study that they commissioned, and if folks are interested, it's rather lengthy. We can send it out to HPD members. Have you seen it? Yes. So it might be worthwhile to talk about.
Well, is it available in electronic format or just paper?
It's electronic.
Oh, okay.
It's electronic. So we can send it out.
Yeah.
Maybe not included with the packet, just so that we don't have to print out something so large, but we can send out the link.
May I?
Yes.
Were there conclusions or takeaways that are easily articulable?
There were about a dozen different takeaways. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't review what they were at this point. But if we want to send it out, we could reserve a little bit of time at the next meeting to talk about it.
Thank you.
Sure. And then I also wanted to just give a brief recap. We had a council work session on the construction excise tax / affordable housing trust fund. And so just as we sort of just talk about this, the CET is the mechanism for collecting the resources. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is the mechanism for using the resources. And so you'll hear me talk about both of those in the future. The focus of the presentation was really kind of giving an update on what has happened thus far. There is a copy of the presentation in the packet that was shared with the committee members. The entire presentation is available on the city's website if anyone wants to go back and watch the council work session. So really, just so that everyone has an update, many of the first steps associated with this effort is getting the construction excise tax set up so that we can start to generate revenue. Once council took action, we had to pass a set of administrative rules that essentially clarified how our building and permit staff would collect the tax and how it would apply to different projects. So that was really the focus in April.
And the tax went into effect July 1st, right?
Correct. So that was really the focus in April through June, and then July 1st, the tax took effect and started collecting resources. We do anticipate that it'll be about 6 months before we really kind of have enough money to do anything with that. So with that time, we proposed to council a process where we would convene the advisory committee, explore different ideas, and then come back with a set of recommendations in January. We talked about the goals of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. This is a little different than some of the HPB committees. This will sit outside of the HPB structure. It will directly advise the city manager. And so it's considered a city advisory committee. They'll advise the city on the development of goals, related programs, allocation of resources, and then selection of specific projects and program implementation. So many of you are familiar with the city's CDBG Advisory Committee, Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee. So this is a very similar set of functions that the CDBG Advisory Committee plays. And I work with that committee as well. In terms of the advisory committee composition, we did some research into what other jurisdictions are doing, particularly Bend. Bend essentially kind of has a 3-3-3 model. And so we proposed to council 3 members from the business, private sector, community, 3 members from housing and population advocates, and then 3 at-large members. And so didn't really hear any comments or concerns about that. And so a lot of comfort from council with that proposal. And then talked a little bit about the application and selection process. We will be soliciting applications for committee members. We'll be sending that out probably in the next week. And then we'll get those applications and city manager will select the members. And we hope to have our first advisory committee meeting in late September. And in terms of the focus areas, we really talked about the goals of expanding the supply of new affordable housing, preservation of existing affordable housing, and direct assistance to renters and home buyers. And in the discussion with council, there was a huge amount of interest in the direct assistance to renters and home buyers. And so council is asking us to come back with ideas for that. There was also interest in the other areas as well, but this is the one that really stood out in the council conversation. And then, so the next slides are really kind of comparing with our current consolidated plan goals, which have some similarities, and a review of the next steps. Councilor Pryor, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's really good. The council was being given an informational presentation, but as has happened sometimes in the past, they said what we really want to do is give you a more clear direction in terms of all the different areas you could go. So an actual motion was made to focus in on a couple of these areas in terms of where that money would be used, and that actually passed the council. What it does is it really kind of allocates or decides the buckets, but it didn't go into a lot of detail in terms of what would happen within those buckets. So, we could go in a lot of different directions, and the council wanted to provide at least some basic sidelines, some guide rails. But within that, there's still a lot of room to create actual programs and implementation steps and things like that. So, we didn't expect a vote on it, but I think it was helpful in terms of giving us some additional guidance on where we want to focus as we put these committees and programs together.
And just to be clear, it didn't exclude the other areas, it just established an area of emphasis.
Focus.
And for a significant portion of the resources. Yes?
Can we go over what are those buckets just one more time?
Sure. So on the slide that says desired outcome and potential focus areas.
Oh, got it. Great.
So the potential focus areas: expand the supply of new affordable housing, preserve existing affordable housing, and then direct assistance to renters and home buyers.
Great. So on slide 8, page 4.
Yep.
Bingo. That's great.
So
Thank
it's
you.
the third.
Yeah.
Put some emphasis.
The other, yes.
I'm guessing both these questions are too soon based upon what you said. But on your 15% of the residential CET revenue set aside for down payment assistance, are there parameters for are there parameters for how much money that could be?
So we
For an
don't.
individual person buying a house or family?
So that, and I'm gonna maybe look at Emily because she might know the answer to these questions. So that set aside was established within the state legislation. And what the state said is if you collect a residential CET, 15% of just the residential CET, because there's a residential CET and a commercial CET.
Right, I was digging to the next level.
Right,
Yeah.
right, but I'm just trying to make sure we're all clear about how much money this is. That will be, we're required to give that to the state, who then distributes that money for down payment assistance back to the homeownership center, the state designated homeownership center that serves Eugene. And the money in that program has to be used according to the state's down payment assistance program. And Emily knows the parameters of that program much better than I do.
I do, although with the caveat that they're making some changes before the next RFP comes out, which should be sometime late summer or early fall. Right now, the maximum cap for any individual family is $15,000.
So $15,000, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I received reports from various realtors about median prices, and I heard that right now in Lane County, it's $350,000, is that correct?
That's the median now?
Sounds about right.
And with so obviously those down payment assistants aren't keeping track with the increase in the price of homes. Not that that price would be what first-time buyers, right?
Yeah, but even what first-time buyers can buy, I mean, it's hard to find a house under $250,000.
Right.
So some of the advocacy that is encouraging OHCS to change that is actually to perhaps up that limit from $15,000 to something else. But we probably won't know what the something else is until the RFP comes out in the fall.
May I ask 2 more quick questions that relate to that? Is this a grant? Is this collateralized by anything? Is this something that if the people sell the house, it's repaid to the city? I'm just curious how that.
It's a silent second loan. It wouldn't be, so the money goes to the state.
and then it gets allocated out to the homeownership centers. When it's allocated to the homeownership centers, it's a grant to us. When we give it as down payment assistance to homeowners, it's done as a silent second loan. So there's a second lien placed on the house, but it accrues zero interest and it requires zero payment until the home is sold.
Which is as it should be, but then you get them,
Then the money revolves back to us, and then we would
It's not
send
the
it out
city's
again.
money anymore.
Correct.
So you keep revolving that up. That's
Mhm.
great. And then last question, and thank you very much for the indulgence. You mentioned a time frame, but not a money, and forgive me, but I like to follow money. So you said in about 6 months there would be enough to do something with 6 months of collecting. Is there a trigger that says this much money will have been received in the account to trigger activity? Or is it a time frame?
It's not a specific dollar trigger, so this is a new tax. We don't know exactly how much. We did some rough estimates, but all of that was based on rear view development activity. So development activity goes up and down from year to year, and since this is based on when developers actually come in seeking a permit, we can't predict exactly how much or when that money is gonna come in. And so what we said is, we know that we're gonna have 6 months accumulation of the tax resource, and then within the ordinance, council also committed to, or as much as we can commit, intended to allocate $500,000.
Put $500,000 in each
general
year.
fund. So we know that we will have at least $500,000, as of January. That action takes place when they pass their budget, their supplemental budget in December.
Thank you.
But we won't know how much will accumulate in terms
We'll know the floor, but not
development.
the maximum.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Other comments or questions? This is, we can schedule some more time at the September meeting to talk about this, but I just wanted to make sure folks had an opportunity to hear a little bit about it and have access to the materials online, and you can also watch the council discussion.
So you will appoint the committee sometime in September. So you can come back in October and tell us who's on the committee. Might be interesting for us to know.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
I don't have any other items.
Teresa?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Any other staff? Nope. Okay. 2019 legislative session recap. So we've got some pieces of paper here, right?
So, HPD members should have copies of the member update provided by the Housing Alliance. There are a tremendous number of different pieces of legislation that passed in this session. And so a lot of new resources, and then also some policy changes that I thought was worthwhile to touch upon. Did we start?
Please do around 12:30.
He's due around, okay,
Yeah.
so not quite here yet. So, I was hoping that he might be here.
Well, do you want
but-
to postpone this then until John gets here?
Is Alyssa here yet?
She'll be here at 12:45.
Okay, so why don't we get started and we can, we'll hope that arrives, so we can talk about this a little bit more. So starting on page 2,
Well, how about if we do the last item on the agenda, because we don't need to wait for anybody
Okay,
for
that's
that.
fine, that's
And then we'll deal with this.
okay.
So, by way of background, we agreed as a housing policy board to create a renters protection committee to follow up the work of the Task Team 3, for lack of a better name. There was a presentation at City Council in April about the results of the survey that they conducted, and City Council said us to come back with some sort of policy recommendations. And so we've decided to form a Renters Protection Committee. We had 21 applicants, which I think is wonderful. And as Chris said, any one of them would be an asset to the committee. But we had to pick 9, and we've done that. So you have a spreadsheet that looks like this in your packet. And so the 9 people that we picked, this is sort of, is myself and John Van Landingham from the Housing Policy Board and Rick Gariff from the Human Rights Commission. And then 3 people in the property management business background, and they are Sarah Vale from Jennings and Jim Straub from Acorn and Jason Evans, whom I don't know, and I don't know what Trio Property Management is. I mean, it's a new name to me. And then 3 tenant population advocates, Sarah Johns, Alicia Jones, and Jackie Lowe. I want to emphasize that we couldn't cover every bucket because we only had, we decided to limit this to 9. It's a workable number. And so we are fully hoping and expecting that others, and there's some in this room, will come and participate because we need input from all. As a reminder, the scope of the Renters Protection Committee, which we tried to narrow it down here last month or 2 months ago, whenever that was. Consider strategies for increasing tenant and landlord awareness. So that means outreach, education. Consider challenges and strategies related to rental application fees and process. In the survey, we saw lots of complaints about application fees and process and all of that, and so we want to look at that. Consider creation of support and explore potential programs. This probably means money. You know, we could come up with recommendations for money, for first, last, and deposit, for that sort of thing. And the CET is a source of potential funding for that sort of thing. Explore options to address housing quality. There were a lot of complaints about quality. We have a rent housing code in Eugene, which is not as well known as it should be, and we will be talking with the code enforcement people to sort of see if there are things we can do there to help address those problems. And then finally, data. You know, we're going to try new things. Let's see how they work. Keep track and be able to report back to council what works. We have sort of a 12-month time frame to do this work, although there's pressure from City Council to be hearing from us more often than 12 months from now. So this is a recommendation to the Housing Policy Board to create this committee. Chris and I, with input from staff, are the ones who put this recommendation together. Are there questions? Chris? Councilor Pryor.
Yeah, trying to make a choice here, I think, is great, and I like the selections we came with. I'm fully supportive. I noticed, though, that of all the people who applied, there's only one here who actually lives in affordable housing.
No, I'm pointing for John. Sorry.
Oh.
To have a seat.
Good place to sit, yeah. And
Pointing at me.
I believe that's Nigel, who's sitting right over there. I know that
I'm
the
sorry.
999
You start the sentence over again.
Okay. I support the recommendations we made. I think the division and the way you put it together is great. The one person, though, who did apply that's living in affordable housing, it'd be nice if we could figure out a way that you could provide support or some advice, maybe attend the meetings and listen, because I think your perspective would be helpful. So even if you're not actually on the formal committee, I would encourage you to come to the meetings and participate as somebody who actually lives in this housing and could provide some perspective. I think would be helpful.
We just have 10
So
people.
I wouldn't want you to just kind of disappear and go away. I would like you to still be involved. And your perspective could be very helpful.
I think that we should.
Thank you.
So there's no, oh yeah, I'm sorry, Joe.
No, please continue. I have a question when you're done.
I mean, it didn't come down with the 10 commandments that would be just 9.
What were
It's
the prioritization criteria?
So,
So, I mean, we had a meeting to talk
Right.
about this, and so I think one thing that we talked about was balance. How do we have kind of a balanced group of people who are part of the rental owners and management community, renters, and a lot of these policies and issues relate very much to the private market. I mean, it does cover affordable housing, but a lot of the things are probably going to be a little bit more about the private market than affordable housing. And then also folks who are knowledgeable about rental policy issues. And then another criteria was because this is some work that is being carried out to support Eugene City Council. We did prioritize Eugene residents because the scope of this committee doesn't really, it's not structured to work on issues outside of Eugene. And the body that is interested in asking us to do this work does not have any ability to make changes outside of Eugene.
We also, because the committee may be in charge of making recommendations regarding doling out money, we didn't feel it was appropriate to have agencies who might be recipients of that fund. I can look at a few of you around the table. It wouldn't be appropriate to have them on the committee. So that's why, for example, you don't see the Housing Authority on here, just as an example.
We are hoping that those agencies would be willing to send staff that could be resources to help answer questions and to share their expertise and experiences, depending upon whatever meeting the topic is covering, or whatever topic the meeting is covering. Yes.
So I was wondering with that, if we do a quick, don't mean to put you on the spot. We did introductions earlier. Candace is here from the Housing Authority. I was wondering if you could talk really quickly about
my new position.
Oh, you're the new whatever. Tell us what you want.
Liaison.
Okay.
I'll stand so that folks can see and hear me. So I'm Candace King. I'm the new housing liaison for Homes for Good, which is the Housing Authority. I'm employed under a 2-year grant program through my Memorial Trust to assist families who experience high barriers to achieving lease up with their voucher. To locate, secure, and retain housing. That role is ever expanding and changing, but most recently I've been focusing my efforts on trying to create a consortium of housing navigators in Lane County who will communicate with one another about best practices and our concerns about issues like practices within the screening and lease up part of the renters market. Anything else?
So we will be expecting you to participate.
Sure.
Add it to the job description.
Why not? So I was definitely looking forward to an opportunity to serve on the committee, but I do understand the conflict of interest sort of element of things. But I'm definitely here as a resource for folks, and I have some cards. So obviously Steve Oakes and I work really closely together.
Any, Josh?
No, your membership. I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I have a question.
Okay.
Now's a good time.
Just as a member of the previous committee or
Right.
task team and sitting in on some of the meetings, I really don't want to get myself in trouble. I was curious how you landed on Jim Stroud, several of as a member for that committee, because people, him and others, came to our meetings, and I know we want to be representative, and actually some of the Jennings people came and said some very nice things in our meetings, and then some other people came in and said some things that didn't seem like they were in line with what we were doing. So I feel like voicing displeasure.
So, okay, that's fine.
But I'm curious.
Well,
Can I answer
I mean, what?
Can I answer that one?
Sure.
So if I hear what you're saying, and I would just like to expand the timeline by a few years, that Jim Straub was an integral member of the Rental Housing Code Advisory Committee, and that I would describe that he performed on that committee very admirably and I think very fairly, and that he has a perspective a broad perspective about the rental market that I don't personally know anybody who knows as much about that as him, other than John. And so I did not have a problem with that. And I think that even if the last time that you heard from him that you didn't like what he had to say, that if you expand the timeline or you give him a little bit more of a chance, I think that he would surprise you with his insight and his civility and his perspective. I think that he has a valuable perspective, and that I don't have to agree with every single person on this list all of the time, but I think that he is a good member. Did I get that right?
Joe?
Yes. A couple of things. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard the two criteria so far were balance and Eugene resident. Did you hear others? When you asked the question about what were the selection criteria? Were there others, or were those the two selection criteria for this plot?
Those are two of the selection criteria. As we looked at the proposals from a staff perspective, and we also looked at what populations folks had awareness of. And so in terms of, have they worked with families or veterans or seniors? And so we were trying to get as many, knowledge of as many of those populations as possible. We were also looking for a lived experience in terms of folks who actually are renting. And so all three of the tenant population advocates are renters. So that was another piece that we thought about at a staff level.
No, that answers my second question, so I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Hi, you got a question? What's your name again? I forgot.
When I did apply, I was looking at the criteria of getting on the committee. It mentioned about being displaced and whatnot, and people who've been through it, who can give advice. And I listened to the names on that list, and it's like, there's no one there who's really living it. Everybody is in the housing or dealing with rental, and I feel the main problem is the people who's been doing it 20 years. They want to keep it the same. It needs to change, and it won't change if you got the same people who's been doing this 20 years. We got to get a reset and start all over, man.
I very much want you to participate. I mean that. And I'm a landlord. I'm also a tenant. I think there will be change. I think you will see change. City Council said they wanted to see recommendations which make real changes that affect real people in real life.
Yeah.
And that's part of my goal serving on this, is to make sure we deliver that. Okay, Joe.
Thank you for speaking. Remember I said you answered my second question, so when you answered, actually this gentleman resurrected that question. So when you mentioned that the three of the people are tenants, and I think you mentioned there was no golden rule, that it would be 9. I really, for whatever it's worth, want to underscore the sentiments that were stated. So many times we hear sentiments of those who have not previously participated or are in touch with groups whose voices have not previously been heard on this level. And I would urge the group, perhaps after a meeting or two, to consider, and forgive me, I didn't catch your name.
Nigel.
Nigel.
Thank you, sir. But to consider Nigel, not just as someone you invite to show up, but someone that you provide the full authority of board membership to, so that input can be factored in accordingly.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you.
I would just speak in support of that as well. I think that even the tenants that are on here, and it's an excellent group of people, but a lot of them, the tenants, have backgrounds within the groups and tenant rights and different organizations. And the average tenant doesn't have access to that information, and maybe could speak to ways to communicate to the tenant population in a way that actually makes sense. And sometimes we get lost in the acronyms and the different organizations that the average tenant does not know about. And I think having somebody who's specifically speaking to that would be helpful to the group.
Okay.
Well, so if I could say, one of the things that we did include is a representative from the Human Rights Commission. And because the city has an entire commission that is really focused on how do we reach all of the people who live in our community. And so as you can see, Rick Guerrera is the Human Rights Commission considered this request and identified Rick as the person that they wanted to put forward on this committee. So I think absolutely there's a need to do this. This is why we did the survey to begin with, that brought in a lot of responses. And as we think about how we do this work, we've talked about how can we move these meetings around in the community, how can we create some opportunities where maybe there's just some longer periods where people can come and talk about their experiences and respond to the different ideas that are being put forward.
So I'd like to move this along, paying attention to the clock, which is my job. So, anybody else? Chris?
I think Rick Guerra will be a great member. I think he will represent a great perspective and point of view. But living in affordable housing, I think, is a variable. It's a criteria. And I think letting Nigel actually serve on the board probably will help more than it will hurt. So I don't think there's any reason not to just go ahead and let him be a member of the committee and go to 10.
Is that okay?
Do I hear, do I hear any objection? I guess I'll ask her.
No, that's a great idea.
Okay, so the committee would be 10, these 9 names plus Nigel? And that's a recommendation to you all. So no more discussion, we'll have a vote. Is that okay? All right, all in favor? Say aye. Or raise your hand or something. Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain, having come in the middle of this.
Okay.
And as a nominee.
Oh.
Yeah, you're on the committee.
I sort of figured that part. But as far
Did
as
you
I
know that before you got here?
No.
Okay, so let's move on. Now the legislative session recap.
So, thank you. So moving to the Housing Alliance summary of the various pieces of legislation. And I also just want to recognize Alyssa Hanson is here to talk about accessory dwelling units.
You want to do that first?
Let's do that first. Let's do that first.
ADUs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thought I missed my spot. You guys are at the very last agenda item, so, whew, okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alyssa Hanson. I'm with the City of Eugene's Planning Division, and I have been working on code amendments related to ADUs for a while. And just a little recap, maybe a couple new folks here who haven't been at some of the previous meetings. Back in 2017, the state adopted a Senate Bill 1051, that had a lot of things in it related to affordable housing or housing affordability. It's trying to get more housing supply. One of them was to make sure that all cities allowed for accessory dwelling units, so cottage, grandmother's flat, whatever you want to call them. We have long-term allowed those in our code, and thought we just needed to make a few tweaks to our land use regulations. Those were adopted by council about a year ago, and then promptly appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, who late that year handed it back to us and told us we needed to do more work to be consistent with what the state law was requiring us to do. We were allowing them, but it was really about the regulations, because the Senate bill said that I haven't looked at this phrase for a little while, we could only have reasonable regulations related to siting and design. And so that was really the sticking point of this appeal. And so we had council dig in earlier this year at all of our regulations and kind of flag which ones they thought met that test, reasonable and were related to either siting and design, or which ones didn't. And then they held a public hearing in May on those, and there were 5 that they identified that were not reasonable regulations related to siting and design. And that would be the one that required that one of the units to be owner occupied, either the main house or the accessory dwelling. There is a maximum limitation on bedrooms, a maximum occupancy limit of how many people could live there. There was a prohibition on accessory dwellings on newly created flag lots after a certain date. And then there was a regulation related to dog keeping that clearly not related to siting and design. So council had directed staff to come back with an ordinance that showed those being struck out and all the other regulations the same. And then in the meantime, which you'll probably hear more about in just a minute, House Bill 2001 came along and said, and it took that bill a long time as it wended through its process, but it had a provision in it that was ultimately passed that said cities, owner occupancy is definitely not a reasonable regulation related to siting and design, nor is requiring on-site parking for an ADU. So if you're going to build an accessory dwelling, the city cannot require you to add additional parking for that. So we had to wait until that bill made it through the process before we could come back to council. We are scheduled for September 16th for council. We will be bringing them a revised ordinance that strikes out the 5 that I mentioned plus the parking requirement. And I guess we'll see what happens there, but at the very least, we know that owner occupancy and parking will be going away. So, and typically those would take, they would go into effect within 30 days unless appealed again. So, but actually, the state law on that provision goes into effect as of January 1st. So even if our code doesn't say no owner occupancy and no parking, those automatically go into place. And that is all I have.
So I'm assuming we will be tracking this, the permits for.
Oh, absolutely.
ADUs
Yes,
that,
and yes.
Eugene gave like 5 of them last year or something.
Right. No, we absolutely, that is definitely part of our monitoring program, and it's going to be interesting to see if what, if any, impact that has.
Yes.
Okay, questions for her?
Joe?
I was just told, I was gonna ask the question, that in the last year, given all this discussion and all this talk, how many ADUs have been permitted and built in Eugene?
I haven't looked at that numbers for a while, so we averaged, I can tell you that before 2014, we used to get 9 or 10 a year, and then after the regulations went into effect, and maybe there's other reasons as well, but it dropped to about 3 to 4 per year.
And does anyone attempt to assess how many illegal, non-permitted, because the
There is
market requires it?
no way to know that. No, we've been asked that as well, because sometimes people will build a structure that's just a bedroom, and then it gets converted, or sometimes people convert parts of their houses, so it's really impossible for us to know. I know there's a lot in my neighborhood, but,
Right, exactly.
I suppose that varies, so no idea, but no.
Thank you.
Yeah, it actually, Alyssa brought up the point I was going to make, which is there was actually a reasonable number being applied for before 2014. And then the city council approved new R1 code amendments in 2014 that dramatically dropped the number of applications because it imposed an entire new set of code requirements, setbacks, height restrictions, a whole series of them. So when Alyssa talks about how the owner occupancy and the parking and a couple of other ones have been kind of moved out of the way, there is still a host of siting and design restrictions that really constrain ADU construction. So the work is not over. This is just one additional step forward, but there's still a lot of work left to do. So the whole code review process we're going through needs to ultimately lead to a review of a whole lot of other codes around siting and design that will require us to review R1 code amendments in order to be able to get further increments down the road. So there's still a lot of work left to do.
John?
2 things. I wanted to note that Better Housing Together had a presentation about, I don't know, a month ago.
It was about 2 months ago, I went.
In which Richie Weinman, a longtime City of Eugene staffer, housing person, talked about how difficult it was for him to do an ADU for his son. His son has...
Not just how difficult, but also how expensive.
Yeah, right.
go
And,
together.
and you think that if somebody who's worked with the city for 30 years would have trouble, then others would have greater trouble. I would like to ask Jenna to talk about Springfield's experience.
So Springfield has just, I don't know, they sort of jumped the gun on all of this a little bit, and they kind of, right, even before SB 1051 came out, they were working on it and issued code modifications eliminating any owner occupancy, and even launched a SDC waiver program, which was renewed, so it's now still in effect, and I think through 2022. And it was funny actually, because there was the previous deadline, the SDC waiver was supposed to end, I think into July of this year, so we had this whole like flurry of people coming to us wanting to get them done before that. But we actually have quite a few in the works. It's interesting. I think there's a lot of interest in it. Certainly, people tend to underestimate the cost of building one from scratch. Converting an existing part of a house or garage is less expensive for sure. You still have to upgrade things, but I think one of the shortcomings still in Springfield's code is that it has a height restriction for, like, you can't do one above a garage, right? Unless your main house is already of the height that like the primary dwelling has to be as tall or taller than the ADU. So I'm not sure that makes sense in all cases, but I'm sure other people would argue otherwise.
So what has been the result, do you know?
I don't know numbers in terms of how many applicants they've had, but just anecdotally, we have a bunch in the works that haven't gotten final permitting yet, so they wouldn't be counted, I guess, yet. And I know a lot of colleagues also are working on units in Springfield.
So to clarify, when you say we have a bunch of work, you mean as an
Our
architect?
office, yeah, our
doing
design
work as
firm.
an architect?
Correct.
You're working on a bunch of it.
So Todd reminds me that the Better Housing Together workshop, what presentation is online. He recorded it. Great.
And we can follow up and find out how many have been permitted.
So send a link.
Send a link for a second. It's youtube.com/top
John.
I don't think the legislature is done with ADUs, at least. There was another bill introduced in the Senate by Senator Michael Dembrow, who's a Portland liberal, Democrat, who had a work group trying to identify other things to promote ADUs. He had Senate Bill 88, which would have allowed counties to allow ADUs outside of urban growth boundaries. So 1051 and 2001 are limited to inside urban growth boundaries. 88 would have allowed counties to do it outside. It was going to cost money because it was going to require somebody, I think the LCD, to survey a fire hazard, which would have been a huge task. So it got sent to Ways and Means and died there. But I would expect that idea to come back.
One other quick question while we're on it is, are there other reasons why people would not permit? Is there a long-term property tax increase? Like, how does the city deal with that as far as, what would be the reasons why people are not permitting these structures?
From what I hear, it's predominantly either the cost to build one or the permit fees. I mean, system development charges, at least in the city of Eugene, are, I think they're around $8,000-ish, plus or minus, for a secondary dwelling unit. Plus, I mean, it's not like they're less expensive to build than a regular house. So that's what I've been hearing is the biggest thing, or really the costs associated, whether it's the building or with the permit fees. There are some regulations that are challenging depending on where you are in the city. Like the slope setbacks don't work very well on slope lots. You have to dig out and have a daylight ADU, so that doesn't work so well.
Not to belabor it, but
Yeah.
is there a standard way, would it on average add $200 to $300 per property tax per year, or is there some?
I don't know, because that's through the
That's what I was
county,
That's what I was
so-
wondering, is if it's really prohibitive on how we reassess the property values.
I believe there was actually something passed at the state level. John, you may remember, or Chris, there was something passed at the state level because there was a problem with them like getting completely reassessed.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was wondering.
Portland had to pass it. I don't think it was passed at the state level.
You don't think it was? I thought it was passed at the state level, but I know that there was conversation about it being passed so that it didn't dramatically change.
And that's why I'm asking is we want to, I would imagine, to incentivize people to do these the proper way, get them on the books,
Right.
and all that
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what would
Absolutely.
be the incentives for people to not do that? And so I was wondering if there was some clarity on that property tax, because that would be a long-term cost associated with actually having a permitted ADU.
I mean, that, I think, is a matter of county policy, because
Okay.
county, the tax assessor does the assessment and taxation in accordance with state requirements.
Okay.
So maybe it was Multnomah County that made the change?
It was, I thought it was at a state level, but it was because of Multnomah County, what was going on there.
Call Mike
I
Cowles.
don't think so.
Call Mike Cowles.
I don't think anything in the legislature did it, and I don't think Portland did property taxes because it would affect other entities besides the city of Portland.
But I remember this being a problem because in Portland they were reassessing houses, and so it was creating huge tax bills for people who had added ADUs. And
I
Maybe
think
we
the
should
subject.
do some research rather
I
than-
think the
Yeah.
subject
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
up at the Better Housing Together
Thank you.
symposium.
I'm meeting with the county tax assessor next week, and I will ask the question.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great.
As a give an example of one, but I have a legal ADU at my house and my property taxes went up by $900.
Did you say legal?
Yes.
That's interesting.
But I think it's legal.
Okay, anything else for Alyssa? So, last item on the agenda, item number 5.
So we're now
Started it.
back to the 2019 legislative recap. And so folks have in front of them the summary. There's a huge number of bills, and so I'm just going to kind of run through them. But as I do, if folks have comments about any of them or want to add something in particular that is relevant, I think that that would be great. And then also too, I just want to recognize that there is an enormous amount of additional resources that are going to be made available, how those resources are going to be made available, and how we can leverage those resources for Lane County have yet to be determined, and it might be useful as a future topic of conversation for the Housing Policy Board. So at the bottom of the second page, a big bill every year is funding for the Emergency Housing Account and State Homelessness Assistance Program. And these resources actually come through the county and for emergency rent assistance, rapid rehousing, and emergency shelter support. So the legislature passed a $40 million bill and with $10 million in additional one-time resources. And all of these bills are for the 2-year period. And so these resources, I believe, are for the 2 years, not per year. Is that right, John?
Sorry, it wasn't.
I was saying these bills are for the 2-year period. So when we say $40 million, it's
Yes.
$40 million for 2 years,
Yes.
not $40 million
Per
each
year.
year.
The state budget's on a 2-year cycle.
Right. Any comments about 5512? Okay. The next one, which we've talked about before, is Senate Bill 608, which limits no-cause evictions and provides statewide rent stabilization to prevent displacement. And so it essentially establishes what folks are calling good cause evictions, and so reasons why folks can be evicted, and then essentially limits rent increases to no more than 10% per year. There's a lot of caveats and details to that. And if you go to the Housing Alliance website, they do have some informational sheets on that, and then also Oregon Law Center also has informational sheets on that. Any comments on 608? No?
I would note that Jim, there's something called the Coastal Caucus, which is all the legislators on the coast, and they're having a conference in 2 weeks, and one of the presentations will be by Jim Stroud, talking about 608.
So next one is House Bill 5005, which is additional resources to develop regulated affordable housing. And so it's $150 million in Article Q general obligation bonds. And these are implemented through the LIFT, the Local Innovation and Fast Track, which we are starting to see some resources come into Lincoln County through those programs. The next one is the property tax exemption sunset renewal. This was very important to City of Eugene. It's also important to Springfield because we do provide property tax exemptions for the development of affordable housing. This was kind of a small bill that kind of kept getting lost in the shuffle, so a lot of folks in the room spent time preparing letters, just keeping it kind of on the radar, which is difficult to do when you have a really busy session. So thank you for doing that. The next one, preserve affordable housing, 5030. Again, lottery bonds is another resource that's been used over time for preservation of affordable housing. The legislature committed $25 million for that purpose. The next one, foreclosure counseling, $1.5 million to provide foreclosure counseling. Do you want to add anything about that, Emily?
Nope, except that we're thrilled to have it.
As Emily mentioned earlier, they did, the legislature passed HB 4007, which increases the document recording fee and allows for the homeownership assistance program to serve people up to 100% of area median income. The state is doing more work to clarify what those changes will look like on the ground. And then moving to endorsements, and I'm not going to go through all of these because there's just so many of them and I want to leave some time for discussion. But kind of priority endorsements, increasing our supply of permanent supportive housing. There's $50 million in general obligation bonds that was passed. And then targeted resources to address child and family homelessness. With $10.5 million for up to 4 pilot programs to address housing instability for families with children receiving TANF. And then 211 is the information system that is used to help direct people to resources that we need. Other things that are kind of scattered throughout the rest of this, we already talked a little bit about House Bill 2001. There is a timeline for implementation, so the changes passed by the legislature essentially have to be implemented at the local level, but it's not automatic. And so there will be a process where city will need to change code, and it'll have to be adopted by city council. And I don't have any specifics on that at this point in time. Yes, go ahead.
As you know, the Eugene City Council took a position in opposition of 2001. I was the lone councilor who advocated for trying to amend it rather than just take flat-out opposition. I will say here, I am not sorry that it passed. I do acknowledge that it will create a lot of additional work for city staff because we've been working diligently for a number of years on a series of zoning and code changes to try to make it Eugene's way of trying to do it. It was going nowhere fast, and it was not making progress, and it was running into roadblocks at a number of points, which I personally found frustrating. I think 2001 just takes that whole thing out of our delay strategy and forces us to start doing something. So from that standpoint, even though I recognize it's going to be a lot more work for city staff, it broke a log jam that I felt was almost unbreakable. And so in this case, I'm not sorry it passed.
The LA Times ran a story 2 weeks ago, the headline of which was roughly, Oregon succeeded where California failed.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, California failed at SB 50, which was...
it's a big deal.
I'm gonna move on to page 6. And so there's multiple items in that page that are worth mentioning. So House Bill 2006 creates additional resources for renter assistance. And understanding how the state is going to deploy these resources, I think it's going to be really important as we both have conversations about renter protections here locally and also use of CET funds. So it's a total of $6 million that was allocated for that purpose. And then moving on down the page, actually I'm going to skip to the next page. And if anyone wants to go back in their comments and go back, these are just the ones that stood out to me. OHCS is adding quite a few additional staff. You can imagine with all these additional resources, they are scrambling to try to figure out how they can actually deploy and implement these programs. There's also some supports for local government. There's a local government technical assistance fund, which is pretty focused on land use issues, code audits, analyses. It's not really, it doesn't really relate to an implementation of affordable housing programs or projects. And House Bill 2002 is about preservation of maintaining affordable housing. It creates some reporting requirements and more of a first refusal for local governments when an affordable housing development is being sold. That definitely kind of creates a little bit more of an opportunity, but also a role for local government and preservation. A market rate housing acquisition fund, it's just $15 million, definitely targeted to a sort of particular type of development. And then 2 bills on manufactured, or actually multiple bills related to manufactured home park residents and code preservation. John, do you want to say anything in particular about those bills?
Yes. 2164 extended the sunset on a capital gains break for park owners, private park owners who sell their parks to the residents or a housing authority or a nonprofit such as St. Vincent de Paul. It also extended a sunset on a $5,000 tax credit for residents who are displaced from a park by a closure. 2896 is a bunch of stuff. That's where I was this morning in Salem meeting with Representative Marsh, who is starting the process for thinking about 2896. It had a bunch of things in it, largely focused on promoting resident purchase of parks or nonprofit and home repair. Both that we already have, or some people are already working on a home repair program for manufactured homes not in a park, on owned land. That stuff is treated typically the same as a stick-built house legally, but not on parks because they're tenants, they rent the space. And so Craft 3 and Van Vliet and Representative Marsh are trying to figure out a product that could be used to rehab manufactured homes in parks and how that would play out with the park owners and the risks there. I suggested that she consider cities that do CDBG home loan, rehab programs for rental housing already. And so I think they probably will be looking at that. 2896 also included $3 million for St. Vincent, the Springfield Manufactured Home Park, the first new park in probably 20 years that St. Vincent's is doing. A little unusual in Oregon, but to target money in a bill to one specific project. But there it is.
So IDAs, Expansion of the Oregon IDA initiative. Do you know anything about that one?
Yeah, the expansion did not work. It died, but the change in the tax credit worked. And so hopefully we will maintain most of the existing capacity of the program. And then come back and try to get an expansion another time.
And just so that folks know, IDAs create a matched savings program to help people save towards assets like homeownership, starting a business, purchasing a vehicle. There's multiple other uses, and how many people have gone through the program?
Oh, I don't know in total.
Like Lane County?
Yeah, hundreds.
Hundreds.
We serve 80 or 90 a year, so
Yeah.
at this point in Lane County, it would be in the hundreds.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to do a quick shout out. This turned into a battle that nobody was expecting, and Nancy Nathanson pulled a rabbit out of her hat at the 11th hour and 59th minute. So if anybody gets a chance to thank her, please do so.
Receivership program improvements, and so a technical fix to improve receivership laws to allow cities to more effectively deal with abandoned homes. And then healthy homes, how to help homeowners with low incomes to maintain home safety. And that one did not advance. And then mortgage interest reform, that did not advance, but I expect to see that come back in the future. Other comments, questions?
I wanted to note back on it, I think mine aren't numbered, but I think it's page 6. Maybe page 7. The middle of the page, it says property tax exemption sunset renewal. That's accurate, but what you need to probably keep in mind is that's MUFTI. It's not the other, there's another property tax exemption that Stephanie talked about. This is just MUFTI.
Both of them passed.
Yes.
Both of them passed.
But this
You're
bill,
right.
262, is just MUFTI.
Got it.
Any questions? Anything else?
If I can just add one note, I did a quick Google search on the Portland ADU property tax issue. It turns out it was an Oregon Department of Revenue administrative change that made Multnomah County unwind what they were doing with the new property tax assessments.
Just Multnomah.
Well, no, it was an Oregon Department of Revenue, so it would apply everywhere.
So would you send me the link?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't quite compute
Okay.
for my
Okay.
lawyer brain.
I mean, I guess one sort of question that I have, especially for providers that are trying to track what's happening at OCS is, I mean, as you guys see these two resources, what are the things that you think will best help us to leverage and access these resources? And this is something that we can definitely talk about at the next meeting, but I think it's a worthy topic of conversation.
Well, there's several from our perspective. Permanent supportive housing money is a big one because it's coming with operating money also, which is unprecedented. And so seeing that, and then the lift money also just gives you money that's just not been available before. So there's a lot of hope. So.
Okay. Anything else, John?
Since I missed information sharing, can I do a couple of quick things? Did you talk about the city council and the CET discussion?
We did.
And I just want to make sure, I don't know whether you mentioned this, that Alan Zelenka particularly asked about the tenant protections report. You mentioned that already, good. The patrician, Manufactured Home Park, I know you were following it with bated breath in the press, but the planning commission voted 4-3 to recommend denial of the zone change, which is a huge step. It's not binding, the council gets to decide in September, but at the direction of the planning staff, the direction of the planning commission, Springfield, the staff created an argument saying that the comprehensive plan promotes both economic development and neighborhood livability, and in this case, neighborhood livability was more important. So they have a legal hook, and now it goes to the council.
Okay. Anything else? We are adjourned.